The dust cloud appeared on the horizon just after dawn, and Ryder Quinn knew immediately that whoever was coming wasn't just passing through, they were heading straight for his ranch with purpose that cut through the morning haze like determination itself. He set down the fence post he'd been about to hammer into the ground and wiped the sweat from his brow despite the early hour, watching as a wagon drawn by two exhausted horses made its slow, unsteady approach toward his property outside Walla Walla, Washington Territory. It was 1883, and unexpected visitors usually meant trouble of one kind or another, though Ryder had learned over his 32 years that trouble came in more varieties than he could count. The wagon lurched to a stop about 20 feet from where he stood, and the driver, a woman with dark blonde hair escaping from beneath a dusty bonnet, looked down at him with eyes that held equal parts desperation and determination. She couldn't have been more than 24 or 25, he guessed, with a face that might have been beautiful if exhaustion hadn't carved itself into every line and shadow. But it was the crying that made him move forward, the unmistakable wail of not one but two infants that pierced the morning quiet. "I need help," the woman said, her voice hoarse as if she'd been crying herself or hadn't had water in far too long. "Please, I don't have anywhere else to go." Ryder approached the wagon slowly, his boots crunching on the dry earth, and looked up at her with questions forming faster than he could ask them. "Are you hurt? Those babies need something." "Everything," she said, and her voice cracked on the word. "They need everything. I need everything. I've been traveling for 3 weeks, and I ran out of money 2 towns back. The horses are about to drop an eye." She stopped, pressing a hand to her mouth as if holding back sobs that wanted to break free. "I was told there was a boarding house in Walla Walla, but I couldn't make it that far. Your ranch was the first place I saw." "Come down from there," Ryder said, already reaching up to help her. "Let's get you and those babies inside. We can sort out the rest after." Her name was Olivia Grant, and the twins, a boy and a girl, were 3 months old, named Thomas and Grace. She told him this in fragments as he helped her down from the wagon, her legs nearly buckling when her feet hit the ground. He caught her elbow, steadying her, feeling how thin she was beneath the layers of dusty traveling clothes. The babies were in a makeshift bed of blankets in the back of the wagon, their faces red from crying, their tiny fists waving in distress. "When did they last eat?" Ryder asked, lifting the nearest baby. Thomas, he thought, though he couldn't tell one from the other yet, with the awkward care of a man unused to handling anything so small and fragile. "This morning, but I don't have much milk anymore," Olivia said, reaching for Grace with trembling hands. "I haven't been eating enough to keep it coming properly. I've been trying to give them goat's milk mixed with water when I could find it, but—" "I've got a dairy cow," Ryder said. "And my housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, she raised 6 children of her own. She'll know what to do. Come on." He led her toward the ranch house, a sturdy 2-story structure his father had built 20 years earlier when the family first claimed this land. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid and comfortable, with a wide front porch and enough rooms for the life his parents had imagined, a life with children and grandchildren filling the spaces with noise and joy. That hadn't happened quite as planned. His father had died 5 years back, his mother 2 years after that, and Ryder had been running the ranch alone since then, except for Mrs. Patterson, who came daily to cook and keep the house from descending into bachelor chaos, and the 3 ranch hands who worked the cattle and horses. Mrs. Patterson took one look at Olivia and the babies, and immediately shifted into the brisk efficiency that Ryder had come to rely on. Within minutes, she had Olivia seated at the kitchen table with a glass of water and a plate of bread and butter, had assessed both babies with experienced hands, and was heating milk on the stove while mixing it with water, and a touch of sugar in proportions she declared would settle their stomachs and fill their bellies proper. "These babies are hungry but not starved," Mrs. Patterson announced, her gray hair pulled back in its customary bun, her round face set in determined lines. "That's good. Means their mother's been doing her best under hard circumstances. You drink that water, girl, and eat that bread. You're dried up like a creek in August, and no wonder you can't feed these little ones proper." Ryder stood back, feeling useless in the sudden flurry of feminine activity, but unwilling to leave entirely. He watched Olivia eat with the desperate hunger of someone who'd been rationing food for far too long, watched Mrs. Patterson test the milk temperature on her wrist before carefully feeding first one baby, and then the other with a sugar tit, a piece of cloth tied around sugar and soaked in the milk mixture that the infants could suck on. The quiet that descended once both babies were feeding was profound. Olivia closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs that she was clearly trying to hold back. "Where's your husband?" Mrs. Patterson asked, not unkindly but with the directness of a woman who needed facts to work with. "Where's these babies' father?" "Dead," Olivia said, opening her eyes but not looking at either of them. "He died before they were born. Pneumonia took him last February. We had a farm in Nebraska, but when he died, I found out he'd borrowed money against it to buy seed for spring planting. The bank took everything. I had nowhere to go except west. My mother's cousin supposedly lives somewhere in Oregon, in Portland. I was trying to reach her." "That's a long way to travel alone with twin babies," Ryder said quietly. "I didn't have a choice," Olivia said, finally looking up at him with eyes that were a striking shade of green despite their redness. "What was I supposed to do? Stay and starve? Hope someone would take pity on a widow with two mouths to feed? I heard there were opportunities out west, that maybe I could find work, could make something of myself. I wasn't planning to show up on a stranger's doorstep begging for help, but the horses started failing yesterday, and I knew I couldn't push them any further without killing them. And the babies were so hungry and I was so tired and I just—" She stopped, shaking her head. "I'm sorry. You didn't ask for any of this. Just let me rest here for an hour or two, let the horses recover, and I'll move on. I won't impose on your kindness any longer than necessary." "Move on to where?" Mrs. Patterson asked bluntly. "You just said you can't push those horses any further, and Walla Walla's still 10 miles from here. You planning to walk it carrying two babies?" "I'll figure something out," Olivia said, but her voice held no conviction. Ryder exchanged a glance with Mrs. Patterson, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her sharp eyes. This woman had no plan, no resources, and no realistic chance of making it to Portland or anywhere else in her current state. The babies were healthy enough now, but wouldn't stay that way if their mother kept trying to travel while half-starved herself. It was a situation that needed solving, and Ryder had never been good at walking away from problems that landed on his doorstep. "You'll stay here," he said, making the decision even as the words left his mouth. "At least for a few days, until you're recovered and the babies are stronger. I've got plenty of room, and Mrs. Patterson can use help in the house if you're feeling obligated to earn your keep. Once you're back on your feet, we'll figure out what comes next." "I can't," Olivia started to protest, but Mrs. Patterson cut her off. "You can and you will, girl. Don't be stupid about this. Those babies need their mother healthy, and their mother needs food and rest. Mr. Quinn here is offering both. You'd be a fool to refuse out of misplaced pride, and you don't strike me as a fool despite your current circumstances." Olivia looked between them, her face working through emotions that Ryder couldn't quite read. Finally, she nodded, fresh tears spilling over. "Thank you. I'll work hard. I promise I won't be a burden. Just give me a few days to recover and I'll do whatever you need. Cook, clean, mend, anything. First thing you'll do is sleep, Mrs. Patterson declared. Mr. Quinn, you help me get her upstairs to the blue room. I'll watch the babies while she rests. And you, she pointed at Olivia, you'll sleep as long as your body needs. No arguing. The blue room had been his mother's sewing room, converted after her death into a guest room that rarely saw use. It had a comfortable bed with clean linens, a rocking chair by the window, and enough space for the wooden cradle that Mrs. Patterson directed Ryder to fetch from the attic, the same cradle he himself had slept in as an infant. Olivia was asleep almost before her head hit the pillow, exhaustion claiming her completely. Ryder stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her sleep with an odd tightness in his chest that he couldn't name. She looked younger in sleep, more vulnerable, and he found himself angry at whatever circumstances had left her traveling alone across the territory with 2 babies and dwindling hope. Downstairs, Mrs. Patterson had both twins sleeping in a laundry basket padded with blankets, their tiny faces finally peaceful. She looked up at Ryder with an expression he recognized, the one that meant she had opinions, and intended to share them whether he wanted to hear them or not. That girl's been through hell, Mrs. Patterson said quietly, keeping her voice low so as not to wake the babies. And those babies need more than a few days of charity. They need stability. They need a home. I'm offering that, Ryder said, for as long as she needs. Are you, Mrs. Patterson asked shrewdly. Because from where I'm standing, you're offering temporary shelter. But that woman and those babies, they need something more permanent. They need a father now, Mr. Quinn. Those children are going to grow up needing more than their mother can provide alone, no matter how hard she works or how much she loves them. What are you suggesting? Ryder asked, though he had a feeling he knew exactly what she was suggesting. I'm suggesting you think about it, Mrs. Patterson said. That's all. Just think about what those babies need, what that girl needs, what you need for that matter. This house has been too quiet for too long and you've been alone too long. Maybe this is Providence putting opportunity right in front of you. She just got here, Ryder protested. I don't even know her. You can't be seriously suggesting I propose marriage to a complete stranger. Wouldn't be the first time such a thing happened out here, Mrs. Patterson said pragmatically. Half the marriages in this territory started as practical arrangements that turned into something more. All I'm saying is think about it. Watch how things develop. But don't wait so long that she feels she has to leave out of obligation or pride. You've got a chance here to do something good, Mr. Quinn. For her, for those babies, and for yourself. Ryder wanted to argue further, but one of the twins, Grace, he thought made a small sound in her sleep that stopped the words in his throat. He looked down at the 2 tiny humans in the laundry basket, at their impossibly small hands and the way their chests rose and fell with each breath, and felt something shift inside him that he hadn't expected. Mrs. Patterson was right about one thing. This house had been too quiet for too long. And these babies, they deserved better than an uncertain future on the road to Portland with a mother who had nothing but determination to sustain her. The next few days fell into a pattern that felt surprisingly natural despite its strangeness. Olivia slept for nearly 16 hours that first day, waking only when the babies needed feeding. Mrs. Patterson had taken charge of the twins with the competence of experience, somehow managing to care for 2 infants while also running the household and feeding the ranch hands who worked the property. By the second day, Olivia was insisting on helping despite her obvious continued exhaustion, and Mrs. Patterson allowed it in small doses, folding laundry, snapping beans, kneading bread dough while sitting at the kitchen table. Ryder found himself inventing reasons to come back to the house more often than usual, checking on things that didn't really need checking, taking his midday meal in the kitchen instead of out on the range with the hands. He told himself he was just making sure Olivia and the babies were all right, that it was simple hospitality and concern. But he knew he was lying to himself. There was something about Olivia Grant that drew him, something beyond her obvious need for help, or the pull of the babies who were already working their way into his heart with surprising speed. He watched her with the twins and saw a kind of fierce, protective love that he'd never witnessed before. Every time she picked up one of those babies, her whole face transformed from weary to radiant. She sang to them in a low, sweet voice while changing their diapers or settling them for sleep. She talked to them constantly, narrating her actions, telling them stories about their father, painting pictures of a man who'd loved them before they were born and would have moved heaven and earth for them if he'd lived. His name was Henry, she told Ryder on the third evening, when he'd come in from the day's work to find her sitting in the kitchen rocking Grace while Thomas slept in the cradle. Mrs. Patterson had moved downstairs. We grew up together, got married when I was 18 and he was 20. He was a good man, not exciting or particularly ambitious, but steady, kind. He wanted a farm and a family and a simple life. We were happy. "I'm sorry you lost him," Ryder said, and meant it. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, still dusty from the day's work but unwilling to leave just yet. "I'm sorry I lost the life we were building," Olivia said, looking down at Grace's sleeping face. "I'm sorry these babies will never know their father. I'm sorry that everything we worked for is gone, but mostly I'm just tired and I'm trying to figure out what comes next." She looked up at him then, her green eyes direct. "I can't stay here forever, Mr. Quinn. You've been extraordinarily kind, but I need to make plans. I need to figure out how to support myself and my children." "Ryder," he said. "Call me Ryder. Mr. Quinn was my father." "Ryder," she repeated, and something about the way she said his name made his chest tighten. "I need to know what opportunities exist in Walla Walla. Is there work for women? Could I find a position as a housekeeper or a seamstress? Could I take in laundry or mending?" "You could," he said slowly. "But it would be hard with 2 babies. Most people who hire help don't want infants underfoot. And finding housing that you could afford on a housekeeper's wages while also paying for childcare." He trailed off, watching her face fall as she clearly reached the same conclusions he had. "It's not impossible, but it wouldn't be easy." "Nothing about my life is easy right now," Olivia said with a flash of spirit that made him want to smile. "But I'll manage. I always do." "There might be another option," Ryder heard himself say, the words coming out before he'd fully decided to speak them. "A different kind of arrangement that would solve some problems for both of us." Olivia looked at him questioningly, her expression wary. "What kind of arrangement? Marriage," Ryder said bluntly, deciding that directness was better than dancing around the subject. "A practical arrangement. You need security and a home for your children. I need—" He paused, trying to find the right words. "I need what you need, I suppose. A family. Someone to share this life with. This ranch is meant for children, for noise and chaos and life. It's been too quiet for too long." The silence that followed his words stretched out painfully. Olivia stared at him as if he'd just suggested something completely insane, her mouth slightly open, Grace stirring in her arms as if sensing her mother's sudden tension. "You're proposing marriage," Olivia said finally, her voice flat with disbelief. "To me, a woman you've known for 3 days, a widow with 2 babies who aren't even yours." "I'm proposing a solution," Ryder said, trying to keep his voice steady and reasonable. "I'm not asking you to fall in love with me, Olivia. I'm offering you partnership. a home for you and the twins, security, my name to protect you from the kind of judgment that follows single mothers. In return, you'd keep the house, help with the ranch accounts, Mrs. Patterson mentioned you can read and write, that you kept the books for your farm back in Nebraska. You'd be my wife in name and in law, and those babies would have a father who could provide for them and protect them. And what would you get from this arrangement? Olivia asked, her eyes narrowing. Besides someone to keep your house and do your accounts, a family, Ryder said simply. Someone to build something with, children in this house again. Maybe more children someday if that's something you'd want. I'm not a romantic, Olivia. I'm a practical man who sees a practical solution to problems we both have. But I'm not a user either. I'd treat you with respect. I'd be a real father to Thomas and Grace. I'd make sure you never had to worry about where your next meal was coming from or whether you'd have a roof over your head. And the other aspects of marriage, Olivia asked, her cheeks coloring. You say you're practical, but most men would expect certain rights that come with having a wife. We'd figure that out as we go, Ryder said, feeling his own face heat. I'm not the kind of man who'd force anything on you, Olivia. If this arrangement never becomes more than a partnership, then that's what it'll be. If someday it becomes something more, well, we'd both have to want that. But I won't demand anything from you except honesty and effort in building a life here. Olivia was quiet for a long time, looking down at Grace, her mind clearly working through the implications of what he was offering. This is insane, she finally whispered. People don't just marry strangers because it's practical. They do out here, Ryder said. More often than you might think. I know it's not what you had with your first husband. I know it's not a love story. But it could be a good life, Olivia, for all of us. I need time to think, Olivia said, not looking at him. This is too much to decide right now. Take all the time you need, Ryder agreed, standing up. The offer stands whenever you're ready to decide. And if you decide no, that's fine too. I won't throw you out. We'll figure something else out. He left then, walking out into the evening coolness, his heart hammering in his chest. He just proposed marriage to a woman he barely knew, offered to take on 2 infants as his own, committed himself to a future he hadn't even been contemplating a week ago. Mrs. Patterson would say he'd taken her advice to heart. His logical mind said he'd lost what little sense he had. But his gut, the part of him that had learned to trust instinct over the years, said he'd just done the rightest thing he'd done in a long time. Olivia gave him her answer 2 days later, finding him in the barn where he was checking on a mare that was due to foal soon. She stood in the doorway, backlit by afternoon sun, looking small and uncertain in one of Mrs. Patterson's borrowed dresses that had been taken in to fit her. I'll marry you, she said without preamble, on certain conditions. Ryder straightened from examining the mare's belly, his heart suddenly racing. What conditions? That you mean what you said about not forcing anything, Olivia said, stepping into the barn with visible determination. That we can take time to know each other properly before this becomes a real marriage in every sense. That you'll really be a father to Thomas and Grace, not just tolerate them because they come with me. And that if this doesn't work, if we find we can't stand each other, you'll help me get to Portland with enough money to start over there. Agreed, Ryder said, on one condition of my own, which is that you give this a real chance, he said. That you don't just wait for it to fail so you can leave with a clear conscience. I'm not asking you to love me, Olivia, but I'm asking you to try to build something real here. Can you agree to that? Olivia was quiet for a moment, studying his face in the dim light of the barn. Then she nodded slowly. I can agree to that. When should we do this? Soon, Ryder said. No point in waiting. There's a preacher in town who can marry us. We'll need a witness or two, but that shouldn't be hard to arrange. How about the day after tomorrow? That give you enough time to prepare." "I don't have anything to prepare," Olivia said with a small, sad laugh. "I don't have a dress to wear or anything to bring to this marriage except my children and my willingness to try. But yes, the day after tomorrow is fine." They married on a Thursday afternoon in the small church on the edge of Walla Walla, with Mrs. Patterson and two of Ryder's ranch hands as witnesses. Olivia wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Patterson had pressed for the occasion, and Ryder wore his best shirt and cleanest pants. The preacher, a weathered man named Reverend Walsh who'd seen every kind of marriage in his 30 years of service, didn't ask questions about the speed of the wedding or the presence of 2 3-month-old babies. He simply led them through the vows with a kind voice and a blessing that felt genuine. When Ryder kissed Olivia to seal their marriage, it was brief and chaste, a formality that left him wanting more even as he respected the boundaries they'd set. Her lips were soft and she smelled faintly of the lavender soap Mrs. Patterson favored. He felt her tremble slightly and wanted to pull her closer, to offer comfort and reassurance, but instead he simply squeezed her hand and turned to accept congratulations from their small audience. They held a simple dinner back at the ranch that evening. Mrs. Patterson had prepared a roast chicken and all the fixings, and the ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse joined them for the meal. It felt strange and right all at once, sitting at the head of the table with Olivia at the foot, watching her laugh at something one of the hands said, seeing her relaxed and almost happy for the first time since she'd arrived. That night, Ryder showed Olivia to the master bedroom that had been his parents' room, carrying her small bag of belongings while she carried the twins. The room was large and comfortable, with a big bed covered in a quilt his mother had made and a fireplace that warmed the space on cold nights. He'd spent the previous day cleaning it thoroughly and moving the cradle in for the babies. "Where will you sleep?" Olivia asked, setting the babies down in the cradle where they'd already dozed off, exhausted from the day's activities. "I'll take the room across the hall," Ryder said. "At least for now, until we figure things out." "Thank you," Olivia said softly, turning to face him, "for everything, for understanding, for not expecting more than I can give right now." "We've got time," Ryder said. "There's no rush for any of it, just settle in. Make this room yours. Make this house yours. We'll figure out the rest as we go." He left then, closing the door softly behind him, and stood in the hallway for a moment listening to the sounds of Olivia moving around, getting ready for bed. He was married. He had a wife and 2 children, all acquired in the space of less than 2 weeks. It should have felt strange, should have felt wrong, but instead it just felt like pieces clicking into place, like his life was finally moving in the direction it was always meant to go. The weeks that followed were an exercise in learning to share space with another person, in negotiating the small intimacies and frustrations of married life. Olivia threw herself into running the household with an efficiency that impressed even Mrs. Patterson, who'd been prepared to be territorial about her domain. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, when the hands came in for meals, when Ryder needed his accounts updated, when the chickens needed feeding and the garden needed tending. The twins grew and thrived, filling the house with their cries and coos and the particular chaos that only babies can create. Ryder found himself hurrying through his work to get back to the house, wanting to see them, to hold them, to watch Olivia with them. He learned to change diapers and warm bottles, to distinguish between Thomas's hungry cry and Grace's tired one, to rock them to sleep with the same songs his own mother had sung to him. He also learned about Olivia's small things at first, details that accumulated into a fuller picture. She was left-handed and got ink stains on her fingers when she worked on the account books. She hummed while she cooked, old songs that she said her grandmother had taught her. She had a temper when things went wrong but cooled down quickly, apologizing when she'd been sharp. She missed her husband but was trying to move forward rather than staying trapped in grief. She read voraciously, going through the small collection of books in Ryder's study and asking if he might get more next time he went into town. What surprised him most was how much he enjoyed her company. They fell into a pattern of talking in the evenings after the babies were asleep, sitting together in the parlor or on the front porch if the weather was fine. She told him about growing up in Nebraska, about her parents who died when she was 16, about the farm she and Henry had been building. He told her about the ranch, about his parents and their dreams for this place, about the work he loved and the loneliness he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "Do you ever regret it?" Olivia asked him one evening about 6 weeks into their marriage. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the hills gold and crimson, the air finally cooling after a hot August day. "Marrying me the way you did, taking on all of this." "No," Ryder said honestly. "Do you?" "I don't know yet," Olivia admitted. "I'm grateful. The babies are safe and healthy and have a home. I'm not constantly terrified about where we'll sleep or what we'll eat. But sometimes it feels strange, being married to someone who's essentially still a stranger. Like I'm playing house instead of actually living." "We're not strangers anymore," Ryder pointed out. "We've been living in the same house for almost 2 months. I've seen you first thing in the morning before you've had coffee. You've seen me come in from the barn covered in muck. We know each other's temperaments and habits. That's more than some couples have when they marry for love." "It's not the same as love, though," Olivia said, but her voice held no accusation, just statement of fact. "No," Ryder agreed. "It's not. But maybe it could be someday if we both wanted that." Olivia turned to look at him then, her green eyes thoughtful in the fading light. "Would you want that? Not just the practical arrangement we agreed to, but actual love, romance, everything that comes with it, with you?" Ryder asked, holding her gaze. "Yes, I would." He watched something shift in her expression, surprise and uncertainty, and maybe the beginning of something that could become interest. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she said quietly. "I loved Henry. He was my whole world for 6 years. I don't know if my heart has room for someone else yet." "I'm not asking you to be ready now," Ryder said. "I'm just saying that when you are ready, if you ever are, I'll be here. And I'll be waiting. No pressure, no demands, just possibility." The conversation ended there, both of them lapsing into comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. But something had changed between them, an acknowledgement of potential that hadn't been spoken aloud before. Ryder felt it in the way Olivia's hand brushed his when she stood to go inside, in the way she paused in the doorway to look back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. September brought the work of harvest, and Olivia insisted on helping despite Ryder's protests that she had enough to do with the house and the twins. She arranged for Mrs. Patterson to watch the babies during the day and came out to the fields, working alongside the hands to gather and store the hay, to prepare the winter feed, to ready the ranch for the colder months ahead. Ryder watched her work and felt his respect for her deepen into something stronger, something that was definitely moving toward what he'd admitted he wanted. She was tough and determined, this woman he'd married. She didn't complain about the heat or the hard work or the blisters on her hands. She laughed with the ranch hands and traded jokes and pulled her weight without excuses. And at the end of each day, when they walked back to the house together in the twilight, dust-covered and exhausted, he felt partnership in a way he hadn't expected. They were building something together, not just a marriage of convenience, but a real team, two people learning to work in tandem toward shared goals. One evening in late September, after a particularly long day of work, Ryder found Olivia sitting on the floor of the parlor with both twins, who were now 5 months old and starting to become actual little people with personalities. Thomas was trying to roll over, his face scrunched in concentration, while Grace was content to lie on her back and grab at her toes. Olivia was encouraging them both, her voice full of delight and pride, completely absorbed in her children. Ryder stood in the doorway watching them, and felt his heart do something strange in his chest, a kind of swooping sensation that he recognized as the moment he'd fully fallen in love with all three of them. Not just attraction or fondness or practical affection, but actual bone-deep love that made him want to give them everything, protect them from everything, build a life with them that would be worthy of the gift of their presence. Olivia looked up and caught him staring, a smile spreading across her face. "Come join us. Thomas is about to master rolling over, and I want someone else to witness this momentous occasion." Ryder sat down on the floor beside her, his leg touching hers, and watched as Thomas finally, triumphantly, rolled from his back to his stomach, immediately crying in frustration when he realized he didn't like that position either. They both laughed, and Olivia reached over to flip him back, praising him for his achievement even as she soothed his distress. "They're getting so big," Ryder said, picking up Grace, who immediately grabbed a handful of his hair and pulled with surprising strength. "They like you," Olivia said, watching him interact with her daughter. "More than like, they love you. Grace lights up whenever you come home. Thomas calms down faster for you than he does for me sometimes. You're really their father now, Ryder, not just in name but in truth. Is that all right?" Ryder asked, suddenly needing to know. "I'm not trying to replace Henry in their lives or in your memory, but they're mine now too, in my heart if not by blood. Is that all right with you?" "It's more than all right," Olivia said softly, her eyes bright with emotion. "It's exactly what I wanted for them, what I hoped for when I agreed to marry you. They deserve a father who loves them, and you do. I can see it every time you look at them." "I love their mother too," Ryder said, the words coming out before he could stop them, raw and honest and terrifying. "I know that might not be what you want to hear. I know we agreed to take things slow and not force anything. But I can't be around you every day, watch you with the babies, work beside you, talk with you, and not fall in love. So I'm just telling you, no pressure. No expectations, just truth." Olivia stared at him, Grace still pulling on his hair, Thomas starting to fuss on the floor between them. The silence stretched out painfully, and Ryder wished he could take the words back, wished he'd kept his feelings to himself for longer, given her more time. "I think I might be falling too," Olivia finally whispered. "I didn't want to, I wasn't trying to, but you make it impossible not to, Ryder. You're kind and patient and hardworking. You're good with my children. You make me laugh. You never make me feel like I'm obligated to be more than I am in any given moment. How am I supposed to not fall in love with that?" "You don't have to," Ryder said, his heart hammering. "But if you do, I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere, Olivia. This is real for me, all of it." She leaned forward then, crossing the small space between them despite the babies in the way, and kissed him with an intensity that took his breath away. It was nothing like their wedding kiss. This was deep and searching and full of the emotion they'd been dancing around for weeks. Grace, trapped between them, made an indignant sound, and Ryder pulled back with a breathless laugh, adjusting his hold on the baby. "I want to keep kissing you," Olivia said, her cheeks flushed, "but our children have terrible timing." "We have time," Ryder said, echoing his words from their wedding night but with entirely different meaning now. "We have all the time in the world." That night, After the twins were asleep in their cradle, Olivia crossed the hallway to the room where Ryder had been sleeping for the past 2 months. She knocked softly and he opened the door, his shirt already off, surprise and hope warring on his face. "I don't want you to sleep in here anymore," Olivia said, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "I want you in our room, in our bed. I want this to be a real marriage, Ryder, in every way." "Are you sure?" Ryder asked, reaching out to cup her face gently. "I don't want you to feel rushed or obligated." "I'm sure," Olivia said, turning her head to kiss his palm. "I want this. I want you. I want us to be a real family, not just pretending anymore." He kissed her then, pulling her into his room and closing the door, and Olivia felt the last of her reservations melt away in the heat of his touch. This was different from what she'd had with Henry. Henry had been comfort and familiarity, the love of youth and shared dreams. Ryder was fire and passion, and the sense of coming home to something she hadn't known she was missing. When he lifted her into his arms and carried her across the hall to the master bedroom, their bedroom now, truly she felt like she was beginning a new chapter of her life, one written with intention and choice rather than desperation and circumstance. Their lovemaking was tender and urgent all at once, an exploration and a claiming, a conversation without words about who they were becoming to each other. Afterward, lying in Ryder's arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow, Olivia felt peace settle over her like a blanket. This was right. This strange, unexpected marriage that had started as a practical arrangement had become something real and precious, and she was grateful beyond words for the twist of fate that had brought her to Ryder's ranch when she'd had nowhere else to turn. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness, feeling him tighten his arms around her. "I love you too," Ryder murmured against her hair. "You and Thomas and Grace, my family, my whole world." The winter that followed was harsh, with storms that blanketed the ranch in snow and temperatures that dropped so low the water froze in the troughs. But inside the house, there was warmth and laughter and the sense of a life being built brick by brick, moment by moment. The twins celebrated their first birthday in February, and Olivia made a cake that Thomas smashed his face into with gleeful abandon while Grace ate hers delicately with her fingers, already showing the personality differences that would define them. Ryder officially adopted the twins that spring, a legal process that required a trip to the courthouse in Walla Walla and paperwork that made everything formal and binding. Their names were changed to Thomas Quinn and Grace Quinn, and when the judge handed Ryder the papers that made it official, he felt emotion clog his throat in a way he hadn't expected. They'd been his in his heart for months, but this made it real in the eyes of the law and the world. "Thank you," Olivia said quietly as they left the courthouse, the twins asleep in the wagon, "for giving them your name, for making them truly yours." "They've been mine since the day you drove onto the ranch," Ryder said. "This just makes it official." That summer, Olivia discovered she was pregnant with their first child together. She told Ryder one evening in June, her face glowing with nervous excitement, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach. "Are you happy?" she asked, watching his face anxiously. "I know we didn't plan this yet. I know the twins are still so young and handful enough on their own." "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Ryder said, pulling her close and spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "A baby, our baby. God, Olivia, I'm over the moon." The pregnancy was easier than her pregnancy with the twins had been, without the stress and poverty that had marked that time. Olivia bloomed with health, her body finally strong and well-fed, and Ryder watched her grow with a sense of wonder and pride that never diminished. They talked about names, about whether they wanted to know if it was a boy or girl, though there was no way to know for certain about how the twins would adjust to a new sibling. Their son was born in March of 1885, during a late winter storm that had Mrs. Patterson rushing through the snow to help with the delivery. He came into the world with a full head of dark hair and his father's blue eyes, screaming his displeasure at the cold world with impressive lung power. They named him Robert, after Ryder's father, and Ryder held him with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the miracle of this child he'd helped create. "He's perfect," Olivia said from the bed, exhausted but radiant, watching her husband bond with their son. "You're perfect. This life we've built is perfect." "It started with you showing up desperate and lost," Ryder said, moving to sit on the edge of the bed so she could see Robert too. "And look what we've become." The twins, now 2 years old and mobile terrors, were fascinated by their new brother. Grace wanted to pet him constantly, treating him like a baby doll, while Thomas was more suspicious of this small creature who'd invaded their home and taken so much of their mother's attention. But both of them would sit quietly when Ryder held Robert and told them stories, and both of them were learning to be gentle when they touched him. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic than before, but full of the kind of richness that comes from a house full of children and love. Ryder expanded the ranch operations, buying more cattle, breeding better horses, making improvements to the property that would benefit their children's future. Olivia managed the household and the books with impressive efficiency, somehow balancing 3 children under 3 while also being a full partner in running the ranch. They celebrated their second wedding anniversary quietly, with a dinner after the children were asleep and time together that felt stolen and precious. Lying in bed afterward, Olivia traced patterns on Ryder's chest and marveled at how different her life was from what she'd imagined it would be 2 years earlier. "You ever think about what would have happened if you'd turned me away that first day?" she asked. "If you'd given me some food and sent me on my way to Walla Walla." "I try not to," Ryder admitted. "It's too painful to imagine. You and the twins were exactly what I needed, even though I didn't know it until you were there." "We needed you too," Olivia said. "More than needed." "You saved us, Ryder, in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Ryder corrected. "I was half alive before you came, just going through the motions. You and the children, you made everything matter again." The years rolled on with the steady rhythm of ranch life, springs full of birthing animals and planting gardens, summers of hard work under endless sun, autumns of harvest and preparation, winters of hunkering down against the cold and finding warmth in family. The twins grew tall and strong, Thomas becoming serious and responsible, Grace becoming wild and fearless. Robert was quieter than his siblings, more thoughtful, with a love for books and learning that delighted his mother. When Olivia discovered she was pregnant again in 1887, it felt like confirmation of the life they'd built, evidence that what they'd started in desperation had become something abundant and real. Their daughter Sarah was born that November, a tiny thing with Olivia's green eyes and a sweet temperament that made her easy to love from the first moment. 4 children, Ryder said, holding Sarah while Olivia slept off the exhaustion of labor. "We have 4 children, Olivia. How did that happen?" "You know exactly how that happened," Olivia murmured sleepily, her eyes still closed but a smile playing at her lips. "I mean, how did I get so lucky?" Ryder clarified, looking down at the tiny girl in his arms. "I was alone on this ranch, building nothing, going nowhere. And now look at us. Look at what we have." "You gave me a chance when I had nothing," Olivia said, opening her eyes to look at him. "You said my children needed a father, and you stepped up to be that father without hesitation. That's not luck, Ryder. That's you being an extraordinary man who does extraordinary things. The children grew, and the ranch prospered, and the marriage that had started as a practical arrangement became one of those rare partnerships where both people brought out the best in each other. Ryder and Olivia learned each other's rhythms so well that they could communicate with just a glance, could anticipate needs and wants without words. They laughed together and fought occasionally, and made up with passion that never seemed to diminish despite the years, and the children and the exhaustion of the life they'd chosen. On their 5th anniversary, Ryder took Olivia into town for dinner at the hotel restaurant, leaving the children with Mrs. Patterson, who'd become more family than employee over the years. It was rare to have time alone, rarer still to dress up and pretend to be sophisticated people instead of hard-working ranchers, and they enjoyed every moment of it. "You remember what you said to me that first week?" Olivia asked over dessert, her eyes sparkling in the lamplight. "When you proposed, I said a lot of things," Ryder said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Which part are you thinking of? You said the twins needed a father now," Olivia recalled. "You were so matter-of-fact about it, like it was obvious that you should just step in and take on 2 babies that weren't even yours, like there was no question that was what should happen." "There wasn't any question," Ryder said. "Not for me. I looked at you and those babies and I knew. Maybe I didn't know then that I'd fall in love with you, or that we'd have this incredible life together. But I knew you belonged here, that we were meant to find each other. I'm glad my horses gave out when they did," Olivia said with a soft laugh. "I'm glad I was desperate enough to stop at the first ranch I saw. I'm glad you were the man I found when I needed someone most. I'm glad you drove onto my property that morning," Ryder said, raising her hand to kiss it. "Best thing that ever happened to me. You showing up dusty and desperate with twin babies and no husband. Best day of my whole life." They went home that night and made love with the intensity of people who knew exactly how lucky they were, who didn't take a single moment for granted. And in the morning, when the children piled into their bed at dawn demanding breakfast and attention and stories, they welcomed the chaos with open arms and grateful hearts. The twins turned 6 in 1889, and Ryder built them a small schoolhouse on the property, hiring a young teacher from town to come out 3 days a week to educate them and the children of the ranch hands. Thomas took to learning like a duck to water, but Grace was more interested in working with the horses than sitting with books. Robert, now 4, was already reading at a level well beyond his years, while 2-year-old Sarah was content to follow her older siblings around and try to do everything they did. Olivia sometimes stood at the kitchen window watching her children play in the yard and felt overwhelmed by gratitude for the life she had. She'd come to this ranch broken and terrified, with nothing but 2 babies and the clothes on her back. And Ryder had looked at her situation and seen possibility instead of burden. He'd offered her everything when she'd had nothing, and he'd never once made her feel like she owed him for it. Their marriage had become the kind of love story that people told around fires and over Sunday dinners, the widow with twin babies who showed up at her rancher's door, and the man who'd taken one look and declared those babies needed a father now, then proceeded to give them exactly that, and so much more. It was a story of second chances and practical decisions that became impractical love, of desperation transformed into abundance. Ryder came up behind her as she stood at the window, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "How lucky I am," Olivia said, leaning back against him. "How different things could have been if I'd stopped at a different ranch or if you'd been a different kind of man." "Things worked out exactly how they were supposed to," Ryder said. "We were supposed to find each other." Those babies were supposed to be mine. This life was supposed to be ours. You really believe that? Olivia asked, turning in his arms to face him. That it was fate or destiny or whatever you want to call it. I believe that sometimes things happen that can't be explained by logic or reason, Ryder said, cupping her face gently. I believe that you and the twins showing up on my property was one of those things. And I believe that every day since has been a gift I did nothing to deserve but am grateful for anyway. You deserve it, Olivia said firmly. You deserve all of it. You're a good man, Ryder Quinn, the best man I've ever known. He kissed her then, deep and slow, and even after 6 years of marriage and 4 children and countless kisses, it still made her knees weak and her heart race. Some things, she thought, never got old. Some loves only got stronger with time and challenge, and the daily choice to keep choosing each other. That evening, with all 4 children finally asleep after the chaos of bedtime, Ryder and Olivia sat on their front porch watching the stars appear one by one in the vast sky above the ranch. The air was warm with late summer heat, crickets sang in the grass, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called out to the night. I've been thinking, Ryder said, breaking the comfortable silence, about expanding the house, adding on a few more rooms. Maybe a proper library for Robert and his books, a bigger bedroom for the twins so they're not constantly fighting for space. We could use more room, Olivia agreed. Though I have to say, I like how cozy everything feels right now, how close we all are. We'll still be close, Ryder assured her. Just with room to breathe and grow. I want to build something that'll last for generations, Olivia. Something our children can pass down to their children. A real legacy. We already have that, Olivia said, gesturing at the house behind them, the land spreading out in all directions, the life they'd built from nothing. This ranch, our children, the love we've created here. That's a legacy that'll outlast any building. You're right, Ryder said, pulling her close, but I still think we should add that library. Robert's going to need somewhere to put all those books he keeps talking about wanting. They sat together as full darkness fell, making plans for the future, talking about the children, discussing ranch business and household matters, and all the mundane details that made up a shared life. And through it all, Olivia felt a deep contentment that she knew came from being exactly where she was supposed to be, with exactly who she was supposed to be with. The story of how they came together, the desperate widow with twin babies, and the rancher who declared those babies needed a father would be told and retold over the years, growing into the kind of legend that families cherish. But the real story, the one they lived every day, was quieter and richer than any legend could capture. It was in the small moments, the shared glances across a crowded room, the inside jokes that only they understood, the way they moved around each other in the kitchen like dancers who'd practiced their routine 1,000 times. It was in the way Ryder still kissed Olivia goodbye every morning before heading out to work, and the way she still stopped whatever she was doing to watch him ride back in every evening. It was in the way they solved problems together, raising children and running a ranch, and building a future with combined effort and mutual respect. It was in the way they still made time for each other despite the demands of 4 children and a working ranch, stealing moments of privacy and intimacy whenever they could. As the years continued to pass, the Quinn Ranch became known throughout the territory as a model of success and prosperity. Ryder's reputation as a fair employer and skilled rancher spread, and people would travel from distant places to buy his horses or learn his methods. But he always said his success came from having the right partner, and everyone who knew them could see it was true. Olivia managed the business side of the ranch with sharp intelligence, kept the household running smoothly, and raised their children with a firm but loving hand. Together, they were formidable. The twins grew into young adults who were as different as night and day. Thomas became his father's right hand on the ranch, serious and hardworking, taking on more responsibility with each passing year. Grace, true to her wild nature, became an exceptional horsewoman who could break and train horses better than any of the hands. She talked about maybe going east for school someday, about seeing more of the world than just Walla Walla. And while Ryder worried about letting his little girl go, Olivia reminded him that they'd raised her to be independent and brave. Robert, bookish and thoughtful, decided he wanted to study law, to perhaps bring justice and order to the still somewhat wild territory they called home. He left for university back east when he was 18, and Olivia cried for days after he was gone, missing her quiet son who'd always been content to sit with her and raid. But she was proud too, proud of the man he'd become, proud that he had opportunities she'd never dreamed of when she'd been a desperate widow with 2 babies. Sarah grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's green eyes and her father's steady temperament. She loved the ranch as much as any of them, loved working in the garden and helping with the animals, and she talked about someday having a ranch of her own, about building something as strong and lasting as what her parents had created. Ryder and Olivia found themselves becoming grandparents earlier than they'd expected when Thomas married a sweet girl from town and started a family of his own. Watching Ryder hold his first grandchild, a boy they named Henry. After Olivia's first husband, Olivia felt the circle of life completing itself in the most beautiful way. That Henry was honored, that his children had grown up loved and secure, that his legacy lived on in the family they'd become, felt right and healing. "He would have been happy for us," Olivia said to Ryder that night, both of them tired but content after a day of celebrating the new baby. "Henry, I mean. He would have been glad that you were there for me and the twins, that you gave them the life he wanted for them but couldn't provide." "I hope so," Ryder said. "I never wanted to replace him, you know, just wanted to honor what he'd started and give those babies what they needed." "You did more than that," Olivia said. "You gave all of us more than we ever dreamed of having. You gave us a home and a family and a future. You gave us yourself, fully and without reservation. That's worth more than anything." On their 20th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration that spilled out of the house and into the yard. There were children everywhere, their own kids now grown, the grandchildren running wild, friends and neighbors who'd become extended family over the years. Mrs. Patterson, now elderly but still sharp as a tack, presided over the food tables with the same efficiency she'd shown for decades. Ryder stood with Olivia on the porch, watching the chaos with satisfaction and joy, his arm around her waist. She'd gone gray earlier than him, silver threads running through the dark blonde, and he thought she'd never been more beautiful than she was now, lines of laughter etched around her eyes, her face showing the evidence of a life well lived and thoroughly enjoyed. 20 years, Olivia marveled. "Can you believe it? 20 years since I drove onto your property with nothing but 2 babies and desperation." "Best day of my life," Ryder said, the same thing he always said when she brought it up. "The day you showed up and changed everything." "You changed everything," Olivia corrected. "You looked at my situation, and instead of seeing burden or complication, you saw possibility. You said my babies needed a father, and you became that father without hesitation." "They needed a father then," Ryder said, watching Thomas chase his own children through the yard, seeing Grace demonstrate horse training techniques to an admiring crowd, knowing Robert was back east making his mark in the world, seeing Sarah helping serve food with the same grace her mother had always shown. And they got one. We all got exactly what we needed, turns out. We got each other. Grace came running up to the porch then, breathless and laughing, her hair escaping from its pins. "Mama, Papa, come on. We're doing toasts and we can't start without the guests of honor." They walked down into the yard together, hand in hand, and stood surrounded by their family while their children gave speeches about love and commitment, and the example their parents had set. Thomas talked about growing up with a father who'd chosen him, who'd never made him feel less than fully his son despite the lack of blood connection. Grace talked about her mother's strength and resilience, about learning from Olivia that it was possible to rebuild your life after everything fell apart. Sarah, their youngest, talked about growing up in a house full of love, about the security that came from seeing your parents genuinely cherish each other. Robert, who'd come home from back east for the occasion, talked about both his parents, about Ryder teaching him that being a man meant taking responsibility even when it wasn't required, and about Olivia showing him that intelligence and strength could coexist with kindness and compassion. He raised his glass and said, "To my parents, who proved that the best love stories aren't always the ones that start with romance. Sometimes they start with desperation and kindness and a simple statement that babies need a father, and then they become something legendary." Everyone raised their glasses, voices joining in agreement, and Ryder felt emotion thick in his throat as he looked around at everything they'd built. This family, this ranch, this life, it had all started with Olivia showing up dusty and desperate that morning 20 years ago. And he'd taken one look at her situation and known what needed to happen. Those babies had needed a father, and he'd needed them just as much, even if he hadn't known it at the time. That night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Ryder and Olivia walked out to their favorite spot on the property, a small rise that overlooked the ranch buildings and the rolling hills beyond. The moon was full and bright, casting silver light over everything, and the night was peaceful and perfect. "If you could go back," Ryder asked, "would you change anything? Make different choices?" "Not a single thing," Olivia said without hesitation. "Every hard moment, every struggle, every tear, it all led here. To this life, to you, to our family. Why would I change any of that?" "I wouldn't either," Ryder said. "Though I wish I could have saved you some of that pain. Wish you hadn't had to go through losing Henry and losing the farm and traveling alone with 2 babies. That pain made me who I am," Olivia said. "It gave me strength I didn't know I had, and it brought me here to you. I'm grateful for all of it, even the hard parts." They stood together in the moonlight, these 2 people who'd started as strangers bound by practical necessity and had become everything to each other. The ranch spread out below them, solid and prospering, a testament to what could be built with hard work and partnership and love. Their children were grown and thriving, carrying forward the values they'd been raised with. Their grandchildren would grow up with the same security and love that had defined this place. Ryder pulled Olivia close, breathing in the familiar scent of her, feeling the solid reality of her in his arms. "I love you," he said, the same words he'd said thousands of times over 20 years but which never lost their power or truth. "I love you too," Olivia said, tilting her face up for his kiss. "My rancher, my husband, the father my children needed and the partner I didn't know I was looking for." They kissed under the moonlight, these 2 people who'd built something extraordinary from desperate circumstances and practical decisions. And if anyone had asked them the secret to their success, they would have said it was simple. They'd both been willing to take a chance on possibility. Olivia had been willing to accept help when she needed it most. Ryder had been willing to offer everything he had without knowing how it would turn out. The years continued to roll forward, bringing more changes and more joys. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with young voices and laughter. Ryder and Olivia grew older together, their hair going white, their steps slowing, but their love never diminishing. They'd sit on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset, and marvel at the life they'd created together. When Ryder finally passed at the age of 78, surrounded by family and at peace, his last words were to Olivia. "Best day of my life was when you drove onto this property with those babies. Thank you for everything." Olivia lived 5 more years after that, cared for by her children and grandchildren, still sharp and engaged with life despite her grief at losing her partner. She told the story of how she and Ryder met to anyone who would listen, wanting to make sure the tale was preserved for future generations. She told it to her great-grandchildren as they sat at her feet, wide-eyed and attentive. "I showed up with twin babies and no husband," she would say. "I was desperate and scared and had nowhere else to turn. And your great-grandfather, he took one look at us and said, 'They need a father now.' Just like that, matter of fact as could be. And he became that father and so much more. He gave us everything: a home, a family, a future, love that lasted decades. He was the best man I ever knew, and I was lucky enough to spend most of my life with him." When Olivia passed peacefully in her sleep at 83, she was buried next to Ryder on the hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and the dates of their shared life. But their real monument was the ranch itself, still thriving under Thomas's management, still home to multiple generations of Quinns. Their legacy was in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their values forward, who told their story to their own children, who built on the foundation of love and partnership that Ryder and Olivia had created. The story became legend in Walla Walla, and the surrounding territory the tale of the desperate widow who'd shown up at a bachelor rancher's door, and the man who'd looked at her situation and seen opportunity rather than burden. People told it as a love story, which it was. But it was also a story about kindness and practical compassion, about taking chances on possibility, about building something lasting from unpromising beginnings. And in the ranch house that Ryder had built and Olivia had filled with life, new generations continued to gather around the table for family dinners, continued to work the land that had sustained their family for decades, continued to tell the story of how it all began. With a dust cloud on the horizon one summer morning in 1883, with twin babies crying in a wagon, with a simple declaration that they needed a father now, and with 2 people brave enough to take a chance on each other and build something extraordinary together. The Quinn Ranch stood as testament to what was possible when desperation met with generosity, when practical arrangements blossomed into deep love, when 2 broken people came together and made each other whole. It stood as proof that the best love stories weren't always the ones that started with romance and passion. Sometimes they started with need and kindness and grew into something that would last for generations. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right across the hills of Washington Territory, people said you could still feel the love that Ryder and Olivia had built together, still sense the strength of the partnership that had created something lasting and good. Their story lived on, passed down through the years, a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings led to the most beautiful endings, and that love could be found even in the most desperate of circumstances by those brave enough to reach for it.